The wind in the Montana hills carried a language of its own, soft whistles through tall grass, low groans across the pine ridges, sharp whistles that bent treetops like silent metronomes. Emily Carter learned to listen to it long before she learned to speak in full sentences. Her grandfather, Frank Carter, always said the wind was a storyteller, revealing secrets to anyone patient enough to listen. As a child, Emily would sit cross-legged on the porch while Frank polished his old Marine sniper rifle, the metal catching the fading sunlight like liquid silver. Frank had been a quiet man, the kind whose presence filled a room without words. He rarely spoke of his years in the service, but the medals tucked in an old cigar box told enough of the story. More than the medals, it was the discipline, the careful movements, the respect for precision that fascinated Emily. She watched how he handled his rifle, slow, deliberate, steady. Even as a child, she understood that steadiness was more than a physical skill. It was a way of being. When Emily was 9, Frank placed a small BB gun into her hands. "Not a toy," he said, his voice gravelly with age. A lesson. Her first attempt at shooting a soda can perched on a fence post sent the can tumbling nowhere near the bullseye he'd drawn in black marker. Frank didn't laugh. He simply nodded, adjusted her stance, and said, "Again." That day stretched into weeks, weeks into years. By the time she turned 12, Emily could split a bottle cap from 50 yards. But skill was only part of the inheritance Frank left her. From him, Emily absorbed an unshakable patience and an ear for the wind. He taught her how to read the subtle shifts in air pressure, how to notice the invisible dance of leaves that betrayed an upcoming gust. "The bullet doesn't just travel through space," he told her one evening, their silhouettes framed by a sunset bleeding across the sky. "It travels through time and chaos. Your job is to listen." Frank passed away when Emily was 16. The loss hollowed her, but also anchored her to the range they had shared. Shooting became more than a pastime. It was a living connection to the man who had believed in her quiet strength. Yet the outside world was far less welcoming. When Emily first entered the local shooting club, the air smelled of gun oil and skepticism. Men in heavy jackets turned to glance at the teenager walking in with a second-hand rifle slung across her shoulder. Their eyes flicked over her slight frame, her soft brown hair tucked beneath a warm baseball cap. The silence felt heavier than the rifle in her hands. "Little young for this, ain't you?" One older shooter muttered, not bothering to hide the smirk tugging at his lips. Another leaned toward his friend, whispering loudly enough for Emily to hear, "Hope she's just here to watch." Emily kept her eyes forward, pretending their words were nothing more than background noise. But each comment sank like a pebble into her chest, small and sharp. She loaded her rifle at the far end of the range, Frank's old advice echoing in her mind. Steady hands, steady heart. Let the noise fade. Her first official practice at the club didn't go well. The targets were farther than the backyard range she'd grown up on, and a cold wind sliced across her face, numbing her fingers. Her first shot landed several inches off the mark. A cluster of men behind her chuckled. "Maybe knitting's more your speed," one of them said, drawing a ripple of laughter. Emily tightened her grip on the rifle, but said nothing. Words wouldn't straighten a bullet's path. Only skill would. She adjusted her stance, inhaled slowly, and fired again. The shot struck closer, but still not perfect. More laughter. Those early sessions became a pattern. Missed shots, quiet determination, and an audience eager to see her fail. It wasn't just the club members. At local competitions, Emily found herself the only woman on the roster more often than not. Some opponents offered polite smiles, but their eyes betrayed disbelief. Sponsors overlooked her entirely, directing their offers to male competitors with half her accuracy. Even her own family wavered. Her mother worried about the time Emily spent at the range, instead of pursuing normal teenage activities. "College applications won't care about shooting," she said more than once, her tone gentle but firm. Friends invited her to parties, only to stop asking when she repeatedly declined in favor of late-night practice. But Emily refused to quit. Each failure became data. She filled notebooks with calculations, bullet drop over distance, wind drift formulas, humidity corrections. She practiced until the muscles in her shoulders ached and the pads of her fingers grew calloused. While others boasted about new equipment, she learned to make small adjustments, half a degree on the scope, a fraction of pressure on the trigger that turned near misses into bullseyes. Still, whispers followed her everywhere. At competitions, she overheard them while loading her rifle. "She's talented, sure, but she doesn't have the strength for extreme range." At the club, members lowered their voices only slightly. "Women can shoot, but they can't compete at the top." Different biology. Each remark felt like a challenge carved into the cold Montana air. One rainy afternoon, after a particularly grueling session, Emily sat alone in her pickup truck, the dashboard light casting a pale glow across her tired face. Rain drummed against the windshield, a steady rhythm matching her heartbeat. For the first time, doubt pressed against her like a physical weight. "Maybe they're right," she thought. "Maybe this dream is bigger than my hands can hold." Then she remembered Frank's last words to her, spoken from a hospital bed as the winter sun set outside. "Don't let them tell you what you can't do. The wind belongs to anyone willing to listen." Emily closed her eyes, inhaled the damp air, and felt the doubt loosen its grip. She wasn't chasing trophies. She was chasing mastery of the wind, of the rifle, of herself. The next morning, she was back at the range before sunrise. Mist curled across the hills as she set up her rifle, the cold biting at her fingertips. She listened to the wind the way Frank had taught her. The breeze whispered across the tall grass, carrying both warning and promise. Emily adjusted her aim, exhaled slowly, and fired. The bullet struck the target's center with a sharp, satisfying snap. No applause. No cheers. Just the quiet confirmation of skill meeting preparation. Emily allowed herself a small smile. The men would keep doubting her. The whispers would continue. But the target, the only true judge, didn't care who held the rifle. In that moment, Emily decided that she would outlast every skeptic. She would train until the whispers turned into questions, until the questions turned into awe. And one day, she would take a shot so undeniable that even the wind itself would carry her name. The first months of competition were brutal. Emily entered her first official long-range meet with cautious optimism, but the reality of the field struck her like a cold gust. The targets sat far beyond anything she had practiced, distances where a single breath could shift a bullet by inches, where wind patterns changed mid-flight. Competitors arrived in polished trucks, hauling precision rifles with price tags larger than Emily's annual budget. She carried her grandfather's rebuilt rifle in a worn canvas case, its wooden stock faded from years of use. From the opening shot, her nerves betrayed her. Her hands, usually steady, trembled just enough to widen her grouping. The metallic crack of each miss echoed across the range like a public verdict. Her first round landed embarrassingly wide of the mark. Spectators murmured. Some shook their heads as if confirming an obvious prediction. A pair of teenage boys laughed outright when her second shot fell short. Emily fought to drown out the noise, but each chuckle sliced into her focus. By the end of the day, she ranked near the bottom. The judges, polite but disinterested, offered a brief handshake and moved on. Competitors packed their rifles with the smooth confidence of men who believed they belonged there. Emily lingered to clean her weapon, every missed shot replaying in her mind like an unwelcome echo. It would have been easy to quit after that humiliation. Instead, Emily doubled her training. Early mornings found her hiking into the hills with sandbags and heavy gear, building the stamina needed to carry equipment across uneven terrain. Evenings were spent at the range until her shoulders ached and her vision blurred. She logged every shot in a battered notebook, noting wind speed, temperature, bullet drop, and barrel wear. The data became her silent ally. But the work was punishing. Montana winters bit hard, turning metal icy beneath her gloves. Wind sliced across the hills, numbing her fingertips until she could barely feel the trigger. On some nights, she returned home so cold her hands shook while unlocking the door. Her mother would glance up from the kitchen table with a worried frown. "You don't have to keep doing this," she'd say, setting aside a mug of tea. "It's just a hobby. Nobody's going to think less of you if you stop." Emily would force a small smile and mumble something about one more competition, one more chance. The truth was harder to admit. Quitting felt like betraying not just herself, but the memory of her grandfather. Money became another obstacle. Ammunition for extreme-range shooting was expensive, and Emily's part-time job at a local hardware store barely covered rent and gas. She sold old belongings, childhood toys, unused electronics, even a guitar she'd once treasured to buy match-grade bullets and pay entry fees. Friends invited her to weekend getaways or concerts, but she declined, unwilling to sacrifice training time. Gradually, invitations stopped coming. Her world narrowed to work, practice, and the lonely pursuit of improvement. Each new competition carried its own small heartbreaks. Sometimes she missed by inches, sometimes by feet. Once, a sudden gust of wind curved a perfect shot into the dirt just shy of the target. Judges marked the miss without sympathy. Rivals offered half-smiles that felt like daggers. At one meet, a veteran shooter approached her after a disappointing round. He wore a crisp shooting jacket embroidered with sponsor logos, his confidence polished to a shine. "Not bad for a girl," he said, as though delivering a compliment. "But these distances, they're a different game. Takes more muscle than you think." Emily met his gaze and forced a polite nod, but inside, his words burned like hot metal. Strength? Shooting wasn't about brute force. It was about patience, calculation, and control. Yet no explanation would change his mind. Only performance would. Despite the losses, Emily noticed small improvements. Her grouping tightened. Her breathing slowed to a controlled rhythm. She learned to watch the distant grass for subtle flickers of wind direction, to feel microshifts in air pressure on her skin. Each failure became a data point, each success a quiet proof that progress was possible. Still, progress was slow. Months passed. Her rankings remained low enough to escape headlines. Sponsors looked elsewhere. At the range, men still offered unsolicited advice. "Loosen your grip," one would say. "Try a heavier barrel," another suggested, as though her gender made her incapable of independent analysis. Emily thanked them politely, then ignored the comments. The grind began to wear on her spirit. There were nights she sat in her pickup truck long after practice ended, forehead resting against the steering wheel, wondering if the dream was worth the cost. She thought of Frank's lessons, of the way his eyes had twinkled when she landed a perfect shot as a child. He wouldn't quit, she told herself. And neither will I. A turning point came during an unremarkable local meet on a blustery spring afternoon. The sky threatened rain, and most competitors cursed the shifting winds. Emily welcomed them. She adjusted her scope, compensated for gusts, and let instinct guide her calculations. Shot after shot found its mark. By the end of the round, she ranked in the top 10, a small victory, but a breakthrough nonetheless. The improvement didn't escape notice. A few spectators clapped politely. A fellow competitor, an older woman named Sarah, who rarely spoke, approached with a quiet smile. "They don't see it yet," Sarah said, nodding toward the men packing their rifles. "But you're getting close." Those simple words fueled Emily for weeks. For the first time, someone within the community acknowledged her potential without condescension. Emily's training became even more precise. She invested in a small weather station to record humidity, barometric pressure, and wind speed. She began dry firing drills at home to perfect her trigger pull without wasting ammunition. Meditation entered her routine, helping her lower her heart rate before each shot. Slowly, the line between failure and success blurred. Yet the whispers persisted. Online forums questioned her presence in competitions. "She's chasing a fantasy," one commenter wrote. "Women don't have the steadiness for extreme range." Others mocked her equipment, suggesting her rifle was outdated, her optics cheap. Emily read the comments late at night, each one a spark to the quiet fire in her chest. The struggle extended beyond the range. Emily's finances grew tighter as travel costs increased. She slept in her truck during some competitions to save on hotels, washing up in gas station restrooms before matches. Her mother pleaded with her to reconsider, offering to help with bills if she'd just slow down. But Emily shook her head. "I can't stop now," she said softly. "I'm getting closer." Closer to what? She couldn't always articulate. It wasn't just about winning. It was about proving, if only to herself, that perseverance could rewrite the limits others placed on her. By the end of her second competitive season, Emily's scores consistently placed her in the middle of the pack. Still far from the top, but no longer an afterthought. Her presence at competitions, once a novelty, became a quiet fact. Some rivals even offered grudging respect, though their eyes still held doubt. Then came the announcement that would change everything. A new event, unlike any before, a 5,000-meter extreme-range competition, the longest sanctioned shot in modern marksmanship. Experts dismissed it as a stunt, a publicity grab impossible to win. But Emily's pulse quickened as she read the details. Distance had always been her greatest challenge, and here was a stage designed to push the limits of every shooter alive. A week later, an email arrived. A wild card invitation. Somehow, her improved scores and steady persistence had caught the organizers' attention. Emily stared at the screen, heart pounding. The opportunity felt both terrifying and inevitable. Every grueling practice, every humiliating loss, every lonely night of data and wind calculations, had it all been leading here? She closed the laptop and sat in silence, listening to the Montana wind scrape against the windows. It carried the same subtle music Frank once taught her to hear, a rhythm of challenge and promise. Emily inhaled deeply, letting the sound settle inside her. The doubts of others still lingered, but now they sounded different, less like prophecy, more like background noise. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet certainty took root. The impossible distance called to her, and she intended to answer. The email arrived on a quiet Thursday morning, tucked between an electricity bill and an automated message from her hardware store job. Emily almost deleted it without opening, assuming it was another generic update from one of the shooting forums she subscribed to. But the subject line stopped her cold. Invitation to the Frontier Challenge, 5,000-meter extreme range competition. She clicked it open, heart thudding in her chest. The words blurred for a moment as she scanned the details. The Frontier Challenge, a brand new event, would be held in the rugged high desert of New Mexico, where thin air and unpredictable winds promised the hardest conditions in competitive shooting. The target distance, a staggering 5,000 meters. Nearly 3 miles. Emily sat back in her chair, staring at the glowing screen. 5,000 meters wasn't just a number. It was a statement. No sanctioned match had ever attempted a shot so long. The bullet's flight would last more than 10 seconds, enough time for 100 tiny factors to nudge it off course. Crosswinds, air temperature shifts, even the curvature of the earth. Experts in online forums were already calling it a publicity stunt, an impossible dream disguised as a competition. And yet, there it was in black and white. You have been selected for a wild card entry. For a long minute she didn't move. Wild card. That meant she hadn't qualified through ranking points if scores still weren't high enough. But someone on the committee had noticed her steady improvement. Someone believed she deserved a chance. Emily's pulse quickened, then steadied as the weight of the decision settled in. This was more than another match. It was an invitation to stand on a stage where even seasoned professionals hesitated. A single shot could define her career or expose her as the amateur many already claimed she was. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Dinner tonight?" "I made chili." Emily exhaled and set the phone aside. How could she explain to anyone what this meant? That evening, she drove to her mother's house, the email still glowing in her mind. Steam from the chili fogged the kitchen windows, and the warm scent of cumin and tomato filled the air. Her mother ladled soup into bowls, watching Emily's distracted expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost," her mother said, sliding a bowl across the table. Emily hesitated, then pulled out her phone and showed her the email. Her mother's eyebrows lifted as she read. 5,000 meters? She said, disbelief softening into concern. "Honey, that sounds dangerous and impossible. Are you really thinking about it?" Emily nodded, though doubt gnawed at the edges of her resolve. "It's the chance of a lifetime," she said quietly. "This is what I've been working toward, even if I didn't know it." Her mother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I know you're good. But these people, you said yourself they treat you like you don't belong. Do you want to put yourself through that again?" Emily thought of Frank's quiet confidence, the way he'd taught her to trust the wind. "It's not about them," she said. "It's about proving to myself that I can do it." Her mother studied her for a long moment, then gave a reluctant smile. "Then you'd better make sure you're ready." The next day, Emily called Jack Hayes, the retired Marine sniper, who had been mentoring her in secret for the past year. Jack had the kind of voice that carried authority without volume, a low rumble shaped by decades of service and long days on the range. "A 5-kilometer shot?" Jack repeated when she told him. A faint whistle escaped his lips. Well, that's about as close to impossible as you can get without leaving the atmosphere." "I know," Emily said. "But I want to try." Jack chuckled, though his tone held respect. "Of course you do. You're Frank's granddaughter." He paused. "If you're serious, this won't be like anything you've trained for. You'll need a custom rifle, better optics, a ballistics computer that can factor in every variable, and you'll need to be in the best mental shape of your life." Emily tightened her grip on the phone. "Then let's start now." Word of Emily's invitation spread quickly through the small shooting community. Messages flooded her inbox, some congratulatory, others openly mocking. "Bold move. You'll need a miracle. 5 kilometers? Maybe bring a telescope instead of a rifle. Don't embarrass yourself, sweetheart." Each comment cut deep, but also sharpened her focus. Doubt had always been her silent fuel, and now it burned hotter than ever. At the range, fellow shooters greeted her with thin smiles and pointed questions. "So you're really going to New Mexico?" one asked, leaning against his truck. "That's ambitious. You know, even the pros are calling it a gimmick." Emily simply adjusted her rifle case and said, "We'll see." Preparing for the Frontier Challenge became her sole mission. She worked double shifts at the hardware store to afford ammunition and travel expenses, then trained late into the night. Jack supervised every session with military precision. Together, they tested new bullet weights, experimented with barrel lengths, and calculated trajectories with a level of detail that bordered on obsession. The science of a 5,000-meter shot was staggering. At that distance, a bullet dropped nearly 100 feet from its initial trajectory. Wind gusts as subtle as a butterfly's wing could push it yards off course. Even the Earth's rotation, the Coriolis effect, had to be factored into every calculation. Jack drilled these numbers into her until she could recite them from memory. "This isn't just shooting," he said during one grueling session. "This is physics, mathematics, and nerves of steel. One mistake, one heartbeat out of rhythm, and you'll miss by a mile." Literally. Emily embraced the challenge. She set up wind flags along the range and spent hours studying their movements. She installed a small weather station near her shooting spot, tracking temperature fluctuations by the minute. She practiced lowering her heart rate through controlled breathing, sometimes sitting in silence for 20 minutes before taking a single shot. Despite the exhausting regimen, moments of doubt crept in during the quiet hours. Late at night, alone in her small apartment, Emily would stare at the ballistics charts spread across her kitchen table. What if they're right? She wondered. What if 5 kilometers really is impossible? But then she'd hear Frank's voice in memory. The bullet travels through time and chaos. Your job is to listen. As the competition approached, Emily's determination drew unexpected supporters. Sarah, the older competitor who had once encouraged her, sent a message offering to help with travel costs. A small local sporting goods store offered a modest sponsorship, impressed by her relentless pursuit of improvement. Even a few of the men at the range, once dismissive, began offering quiet nods of respect. Still, skepticism remained. Online commentators continued to predict failure. Some even placed bets on how far off target she would land. Emily ignored the noise, focusing instead on the checklist Jack had given her: gear calibration, ammunition testing, mental conditioning. 2 weeks before the event, Jack handed her a custom-built rifle, longer, heavier, and more precise than anything she'd ever used. Its matte black finish gleamed under the range lights. "This is the best we can give you," Jack said. "The rest is up to you." Emily ran her fingers along the smooth stock, feeling the weight of possibility in her hands. "It's perfect," she said softly. Jack studied her with a rare smile. Frank would be proud. "But remember, Emily, this isn't just about hitting a target. It's about proving that preparation can conquer what everyone else calls impossible." On the night before departure, Emily packed her gear with deliberate care. Each piece of equipment, scope, rifle, weather meter, was a testament to years of sacrifice. As she zipped the final case, she paused by the window. The Montana wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a familiar scent of pine and cold earth. For a moment, she imagined Frank standing beside her, hands tucked into the pockets of his old jacket, eyes sparkling with quiet pride. "They don't think you can do it," she whispered to the night. "But they don't know how hard I've listened," the wind answered with a soft, steady hum. Emily smiled, feeling a calm resolve settle in her chest. Tomorrow, she would leave Montana for New Mexico. Tomorrow, she would face a distance most believed no human could master. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. The high desert of New Mexico was a place of harsh beauty, endless skies, sun-scorched mesas, and winds that carried their own moods. Emily arrived a month before the Frontier Challenge, determined to train on terrain that matched the competition site as closely as possible. The air here felt different, thinner, drier, sharp with the scent of sagebrush. It was a landscape that punished weakness and rewarded patience, and Emily knew she would need both if she was to stand a chance at the impossible 5,000-meter shot. Jack Hayes joined her 3 days later, stepping off the bus with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a calm, assessing gaze. He wore a sun-faded cap and sunglasses that hid eyes sharpened by decades of military service. "If you can shoot here," he said, squinting at the wide horizon, You can shoot anywhere on Earth. Their training schedule was relentless. Mornings began before sunrise, when the air was still and the desert stars glimmered like cold fire. Emily set up targets at progressively longer distances, starting at 2 kilometers and working outward. The first few days were an exercise in humility. Even with Jack's meticulous calculations, her shots veered wildly off course. At 2,000 meters, a subtle crosswind pushed bullets yards off target. At 3,000, the Earth's rotation introduced errors her Montana practice had never fully prepared her for. Jack watched silently as she adjusted scopes, recalculated angles, and fired again. When frustration flickered across her face, he finally spoke. "You're trying to force perfection," he said. "The bullet doesn't care what you want. Listen to it. Listen to the wind. Trust the math." Emily took a slow breath, letting the advice settle. She remembered Frank's words. "Your job is to listen." She closed her eyes and let the sounds of the desert seep into her awareness. The whisper of sand shifting underfoot, the faint sigh of wind across distant ridges, the subtle hum of heat rising from the ground. When she opened her eyes again, the world seemed sharper, more alive. Her next shot landed closer to the mark. Afternoons were devoted to technical drills. Jack taught her to read the wind with near-obsessive precision. They set up wind flags every 100 meters, watching how even the faintest ripple signaled a shift in air currents. Emily learned to feel the breeze against her cheek, to sense micro-changes in pressure through the tug of fabric on her sleeves. At 5,000 meters, Jack explained, the wind isn't one force, it's a dozen, each with its own agenda. You need to predict the entire conversation. They also practiced what Jack called silent shots, where Emily would set up, aim, and drive fire without pulling the trigger. The goal was to perfect every movement, shoulder placement, breathing rhythm, trigger squeeze, until her body operated like a machine. "Muscle memory saves you when nerves kick in," Jack said. "Your mind will scream. Your body has to whisper back, 'I know this.'" Evenings were for calculations. Inside a small rented cabin, they pored over ballistics charts spread across a scarred wooden table. The numbers were staggering. At 5,000 meters, a bullet could drop more than 100 feet. The Coriolis effect, the spin of the Earth, would shift the trajectory by several feet depending on the time of day. Air temperature and humidity could alter speed and drag. Emily filled notebooks with equations until her head ached. Despite the punishing schedule, Emily felt herself growing stronger, sharper. Her groups tightened at distances she once thought unreachable. Her breathing slowed to a meditative rhythm. The desert, once intimidating, began to feel like an ally, unforgiving but fair, revealing its secrets to those who listened long enough. But progress came with setbacks. One morning, a sudden dust storm swept across the range without warning. Sand stung her eyes and jammed the rifle's action, forcing them to pack up early. Another day, an unexpected equipment malfunction threw off her calculations, leaving her shots scattered wildly across the target. Emily cursed under her breath, slamming her notebook shut. Jack remained calm. "You can't control the desert," he said. "But you can control your response. Every failure is data. Every miss tells you something." That night, Emily lay awake, listening to the desert wind howl against the cabin walls. Doubt crept in like a slow, persistent draft. What if the experts were right? What if 5,000 meters truly was beyond human capability? She thought of the online comments, the men at the range who still doubted her, the quiet fear that she might become a public spectacle if she failed. But then she remembered the quiet strength in Frank's eyes, the way he had never raised his voice, but always commanded respect. Don't let them tell you what you can't do. The memory settled over her like a warm blanket. She turned on her side, breathed deeply, and let sleep claim her. As the days passed, Emily and Jack began simulating full competition conditions. They planned the exact sequence of the event, the setup, the calculations, the mental reset before the shot. Jack drilled her on timing, making her hold position for long, agonizing minutes to mimic the delays she might face during the real match. "The hardest part isn't pulling the trigger," he said. "It's waiting while the world tries to shake your focus." Emily also introduced meditation into her routine. Each morning, she sat cross-legged in the sand, eyes closed, focusing on the sound of her breath. At first, her mind wandered to equations and wind charts. But slowly, she learned to quiet the noise, to feel her heartbeat slow to a steady rhythm. The practice paid off on the range. Her trigger pulls grew smoother, her aim steadier. Jack watched her with a mixture of pride and awe. "You're starting to think like a sniper," he said one evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon. Frank would have liked that. Emily smiled faintly. "I hope so." Despite their progress, the looming competition still felt like a distant mountain. 5,000 meters remained an almost mythical challenge, a distance where even the most advanced rifles and ballistics computers operated on the edge of science. Emily knew that even perfection in training couldn't guarantee success. But something inside her had shifted. Where once she felt only pressure, she now felt purpose. The whispers of doubt from competitors and strangers no longer cut as deeply. Each shot, each calculation, each meditation session was a quiet defiance against the limits others tried to impose on her. 2 nights before the competition, Jack surprised her with a small package. Inside lay a worn leather sling, Frank's old rifle strap, preserved after all these years. "He gave this to me once," Jack said, his voice rougher than usual. "Told me to keep it safe in case someone needed it more than I did." Emily traced the weathered leather with trembling fingers. The strap smelled faintly of oil and pine, carrying echoes of her childhood. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll use it," Jack replied. "Frank believed in you long before anyone else. Let this remind you of that when the wind starts talking." Emily swallowed hard and nodded. "I will." That night, she stepped outside the cabin and looked up at the desert sky. Stars glittered like distant targets, impossibly far, yet dazzlingly clear. The air was cool and still, the wind momentarily silent. She closed her eyes and imagined the coming day, the range stretching endlessly before her, the weight of the rifle in her hands, the collective breath of spectators waiting for the impossible. For the first time, she felt no fear, only readiness. By the final day of training, Emily's shots were landing with astonishing consistency at distances that once seemed unreachable. Jack watched her last round strike the distant target and let out a low whistle. "If anyone can make that 5,000-meter shot," he said, "it's you." Emily lowered the rifle and looked toward the far horizon. The target was invisible from here, lost in the vast sweep of desert. Yet in her mind, she could already see it, the mark that would silence every doubt, the bullseye that would carry her name across the shooting world. She tightened the leather sling around her arm, feeling its familiar grip. Tomorrow, she would step onto the range and face the greatest challenge of her life. The desert had trained her. The numbers had prepared her. The wind had spoken. Now it was time to answer. Dawn broke over the New Mexico desert with a cold, metallic light. The horizon glowed pale gold where the sun threatened to rise, casting long shadows across the competition grounds. Emily Carter arrived before most of the crowd, her truck rolling quietly over gravel as the sky shifted from violet to rose. The air was crisp, dry, and edged with a chill that cut through her jacket. It was the kind of morning that made even seasoned shooters double-check their calculations. A frontier challenge was already buzzing with anticipation. Rows of massive tents housed competitors, sponsors, and press teams, their logos snapping in the breeze. Long steel tables were stacked with equipment, rifles gleaming like surgical instruments, ammunition carefully arranged in neat lines. Technicians tested digital spotting scopes while drones hovered overhead, ready to capture every shot for live broadcast. Emily parked at the far end of the staging area and stepped out, carrying her rifle case and a small duffel bag. No entourage. No sponsor banners. Just her and the battered leather sling Jack had given her the night before. As she walked toward her assigned station, conversations quieted. Some competitors barely looked her way. Others watched openly, curiosity sharpening their eyes. A few recognized her from smaller competitions and whispered to each other, their smirks barely concealed. "Is that the wild card?" A man in a sleek black shooting jacket murmured to his partner. "Yeah, the one with the Montana background. Can't believe she even showed up. She won't last past the wind check." 5,000 meters? Forget it. Emily heard them but kept her gaze forward, her boots crunching softly over the packed earth. She had heard it all before at local meets, on online forums, in the low laughter of skeptics who believed long-range shooting belonged to men with expensive rifles and military pedigrees. None of it mattered now. Her station sat at the very edge of the range, a long rectangular platform facing a horizon that seemed endless. The target, a small steel plate, no larger than a dinner tray, was 5 kilometers away, invisible to the naked eye. Spotters used high-powered scopes to track impacts, but even they admitted the distance bordered on absurd. Jack was already waiting, leaning against the edge of the platform. His weathered face broke into a small, proud smile as she approached. "You're early," he said. "I couldn't sleep," Emily admitted. "Good. Neither could I. Let's get set up before the wind changes its mind." They worked in practiced silence. Emily unpacked her rifle, a custom-built precision model with a carbon fiber barrel and an ultra-long-range scope. Every piece of equipment had been tested, cleaned, and rechecked dozens of times during training. Still, her hands moved with deliberate care as she assembled the rifle, each click and lock echoing softly in the morning air. Jack checked the weather instruments, while Emily adjusted the bipod and leveled the scope. "Winds at 5 miles per hour from the west," he reported. "Pressure steady. Temperature will rise about 10 degrees in the next 2 hours." Emily nodded, logging the data in her notebook. At this distance, even a half-degree shift in temperature could alter bullet trajectory. By mid-morning, spectators began filling the bleachers set up behind the shooting platforms. Reporters jostled for position, their cameras trained on the competitors. A giant digital scoreboard displayed names and distances, updating in real time. Emily's name sat near the bottom, her wild card status highlighted in gray. She could feel the weight of every eye on her back, but years of practice allowed her to fold the noise into silence. The announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers, welcoming the audience and introducing the event. "Today," he declared, "marks the most ambitious long-range shooting competition in history. Our shooters will attempt a 5,000-meter shot, an achievement once thought impossible." Veteran shooters were introduced first, their bios flashing across massive screens. Military snipers, world record holders, engineers with million-dollar sponsorships. Each received loud applause. When Emily's name appeared, there was polite clapping, a few cheers, and an audible ripple of confusion. "Wild card entry," the announcer explained, almost as an afterthought. "Emily Carter, representing Montana." Emily caught Jack's eye. He gave her a slight nod. "Focus," his expression said. "Ignore the noise." The competition began with preliminary rounds to test equipment and gather wind data. Shooters fired at shorter distances, while technicians calibrated scoring systems. Emily watched carefully, noting how even the best marksmen struggled with the unpredictable gusts. Flags posted along the range fluttered in chaotic patterns, revealing subtle changes in airflow. Every miss sent a murmur through the crowd. When her turn approached, Emily's heart began a slow, steady drumbeat. She moved to her station, the weight of the rifle grounding her as she settled onto the mat. Jack crouched beside her, offering a final check of the calculations. "Remember," he said quietly, "trust the math. Trust the moment. The shot's already there. You just have to meet it." Emily closed her eyes for a brief meditation, blocking out the cheers, the cameras, the distant hum of generators. She slowed her breathing until she could feel her heartbeat steady against the rifle's stock. In her mind, she visualized the path of the bullet, the spin of the barrel, the arc of gravity, the gentle push of the desert wind. The range officer's voice cut through the silence. "Shooter Carter, you may take your shot when ready." Emily exhaled, her cheek pressed against the cool metal of the rifle. Through the scope, the target was a faint blur, just a shimmering speck at the edge of possibility. She adjusted the windage dial, compensated for humidity, and tightened the leather sling around her arm. Every motion was deliberate, every muscle memory hard-won from months of training. The crowd hushed as she began her final sequence. In that moment, time seemed to stretch. She felt the desert breathe around her, the soft whisper of wind across sand, the distant call of a hawk, the slow rotation of the earth beneath her. She inhaled, held, exhaled. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Crack! The rifle thundered, echoing across the vast expanse. A puff of dust rose from the muzzle as the bullet sped into the void, beginning its long, invisible journey. The crowd erupted into an uneasy murmur, craning their necks to watch the distant monitors. Emily remained motionless, eyes fixed through the scope, tracking the tiny glint of the target. At this distance, the bullet's flight time was an eternity seconds, stretched into lifetimes as gravity, wind, and the Coriolis effect all fought to bend its path. Jack watched the spotter's screen, his jaw tight. "Come on," he whispered. "Come on." A faint flash erupted on the hillside. The signal light turned green. Bullseye. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then the range exploded with sound cheers, gasps, the frantic clicking of cameras. Reporters shouted into microphones as spectators leapt to their feet. Emily lowered her rifle with a calm so deep it bordered on surreal. Around her, chaos reigned, but inside she felt only the quiet satisfaction of a promise kept. The range officer's voice cracked over the loudspeaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have confirmation. Shooter Carter has achieved a direct hit at 5,000 meters, setting a new world record." Jack exhaled sharply, a grin breaking across his weathered face. "You did it," he said, voice rough with pride. Emily allowed herself a small smile, but her eyes remained on the distant horizon. The target was invisible again, swallowed by heat and distance. Yet she could still feel the connection, the invisible thread between her steady hands and that faraway mark. Reporters swarmed as she stood, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. Questions poured in. How did you train? What was your secret? Did you know it would hit? Emily answered with quiet grace. No secret, she said simply. Just preparation and belief. Above the noise, she caught Jack's eye. He gave a slow, respectful nod. In that small exchange, Emily felt the full weight of her journey, the lonely nights of practice, the whispers of doubt, the relentless desert training. Every moment had led to this shot, this day, this unshakable proof that skill and will could defy the impossible. As the crowd roared and cameras captured her every move, Emily felt the wind shift across her face. It carried no whispers of doubt, now only the clear, ringing truth of a record broken and a future rewritten. For a full heartbeat after the green signal light flared, silence ruled the range. It wasn't the hush of confusion or hesitation. It was the stunned quiet of 1,000 minds trying to process what their eyes had just witnessed. 5,000 meters. A clean bullseye. A shot that experts claimed was beyond the reach of human ability. Then sound came back all at once, like a wave crashing over rock. The bleachers erupted into thunderous cheers. Spectators leapt to their feet, clapping and shouting as reporters barked into microphones. Drones buzzed like startled bees, their cameras pivoting to capture every angle of the woman at the center of it all. Emily Carter remained still, her cheek resting against the rifle stock, her eyes still fixed through the scope. The desert stretched before her in shimmering heat, the target invisible to the naked eye. For her, the noise felt distant, muffled, as if she were underwater. The only thing she heard was the echo of her grandfather Frank's voice. Trust the math. Trust the moment. Jack Hayes knelt beside her, his weathered face breaking into an uncharacteristic grin. "You did it," he said, his voice carrying both disbelief and pride. "Kid, you actually did it." Emily finally lowered her rifle, her movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. The leather sling creaked softly as she unwrapped it from her arm. She placed the rifle gently on the mat and sat back, breathing in the dry desert air. Her pulse was steady. Her hands, once dismissed as too delicate, were as still as the horizon itself. A range official hurried forward, tablet in hand, eyes wide with excitement. "We've confirmed the hit," he announced breathlessly. 5,000 meters. Center strike. You've broken the world record by over 300 meters. Emily offered a small, measured nod. "Thank you." The man blinked, as if expecting more a fist pump, a triumphant shout. But Emily remained composed. The victory was not in the celebration. It was in the shot itself, the quiet proof that preparation and willpower could outmatch even the harshest odds. Reporters surged forward, microphones extended like spears. Cameras flashed, capturing her from every angle. "How did you stay calm?" one asked. "What was going through your mind during the shot?" shouted another. "Did you know you'd made history the moment you pulled the trigger?" Emily met their questions with the same steadiness she had shown moments earlier. "I focused on the process," she said evenly. "Calculations, breathing, timing. That's all. The rest is just noise." The crowd leaned closer, hungry for more, but Emily gave no dramatic sound bites. Her poise only deepened the mystery. To them, this was a spectacle, a feat of almost supernatural precision. To her, it was the culmination of years of quiet discipline. Jack stepped in to shield her from the crush of reporters. "Give her a minute," he barked, his military tone cutting through the din. "She just made the shot of the century. Let her breathe." The officials ushered Emily toward the scoring tent, where the final data was displayed on massive screens. The target plate, now the most famous piece of steel in the shooting world, showed a clean, perfect strike dead center. Digital overlays highlighted wind speeds, bullet velocity, and trajectory arcs. The math confirmed what the green light had already declared. Emily's shot was flawless. Competitors gathered nearby, their expressions a mix of awe and grudging respect. Some offered handshakes. Others simply stared, shaking their heads. One seasoned sniper, a man with decades of combat and competition experience, finally spoke. "I've been chasing that distance my whole career," he said quietly. "Didn't think it could be done." Emily accepted his handshake without arrogance. "It was a team effort," she replied, nodding toward Jack. "And a lot of math." As news of the record-breaking shot spread across social media, the Frontier Challenge transformed into a media frenzy. Live streams replayed the shot in slow motion, overlaying graphics that traced the bullet's nearly 3-mile journey. Commentators debated every detail: her breathing technique, her rifle modifications, her ability to read the chaotic desert wind. Within minutes, Emily's name trended across platforms worldwide. Yet amidst the chaos, Emily found herself strangely detached. Sitting on a folding chair outside the tent, she watched the crowd surge and swell like a restless desert wind. She thought back to the countless hours of training, the freezing Montana nights, the math scribbled into worn notebooks, the silent mornings spent listening to the wind until it spoke its secrets. This moment, the applause, the headlines, was never the goal. The goal was always the shot. And the shot had already been made. Jack approached, carrying 2 paper cups of lukewarm coffee. He handed one to Emily and sat beside her, his gaze sweeping the horizon. "Frank would have been proud," he said softly. Emily stared out at the endless desert. "I felt him out there," she admitted, "right before I pulled the trigger. It was like he was reminding me to trust it." Jack nodded. "That's the thing about people like Frank. They never really leave. They just wait for the right shot to show up." Emily smiled faintly and took a sip of the bitter coffee. Around them, the crowd continued to roar, but the two of them sat in companionable silence, grounded in the quiet truth of what they had accomplished. Soon, event officials called Emily to the main stage for the award ceremony. The path to the podium felt surreal, like walking through a dream. Spectators reached out to shake her hand, cameras followed her every step, and children waved homemade signs with her name scrawled in bold letters. A large banner overhead proclaimed, "World record 5,000 meters." When she reached the microphone, the crowd erupted once more. Emily stood tall, the leather sling draped across her shoulder like a badge of honor. She waited for the cheers to fade before speaking. "I'm honored," she began, her voice steady despite the thousands listening. "But this isn't just about one shot. It's about every person who's ever been told they couldn't do something because of their gender, their background, or the size of their hands." A ripple of applause rose, punctuated by a few shouts of encouragement. "I didn't set out to break a record," she continued. "I set out to prove that preparation, persistence, and belief matter more than doubt. The math doesn't care who you are. The wind doesn't care. And neither does the target." The crowd responded with a roar of approval. Some stood and clapped. Others wiped at their eyes. Cameras flashed as drones swooped overhead to capture the historic moment. Emily stepped back from the microphone, giving a small nod of thanks before returning to her station. Reporters clamored for interviews, but she politely declined most, choosing instead to spend a few quiet moments with Jack. "You handled that well," he said as they walked away from the stage. "Words are easier than shots," Emily replied with a faint smile. Jack chuckled. "Not when the whole world's watching." As the sun began its slow descent, casting long golden rays across the desert, Emily packed her equipment with the same meticulous care she had shown in the morning. The rifle, now a piece of history, slid smoothly into its case. The leather sling Frank's sling rested gently on top. Before leaving, she turned to look once more at the distant target, now glowing faintly in the evening light. From this distance, it was nothing more than a glinting speck, nearly swallowed by the vast horizon. Yet Emily knew every inch of its shape, every fraction of its distance. She smiled to herself. The shot was over, but the story was only beginning. The crowd's roar lingered in the air long after Emily left the main stage, a thunderous echo that rolled across the desert like a living thing. Everywhere she turned, people reached for her hand, eager to congratulate the woman who had accomplished what experts swore was impossible. Camera crews tracked her every step. Reporters shouted questions over one another, desperate for a quote that would capture the enormity of the day. Emily smiled politely, shook hands when she could, but her thoughts floated somewhere far beyond the flashing lights. The shot was done, the record sealed, and yet the world around her still hummed with disbelief. It was as though the bullet had not only traveled 5,000 meters, but had also cut through decades of unspoken assumptions about who belonged on the range, who was allowed to test the limits of precision. Jack Hayes, steady as ever, acted as her quiet shield. He kept the more aggressive reporters at bay and guided her toward the competitor's pavilion, where a temporary calm awaited. Inside, the atmosphere was different. The tension of the morning had been replaced by a quiet reverence. Competitors who had once dismissed her as an inexperienced wildcard now approached with extended hands and measured respect. The first to greet her was Marcus Delaney, a decorated military sniper with a string of world records to his name. He was older than most, his sharp eyes framed by sun-weathered lines. "Emily," he said, offering a handshake, "I've been chasing that distance my whole career. Didn't think it was possible. You proved the rest of us wrong." Emily shook his hand firmly. "Thank you," she replied. "It was a team effort and a lot of math." Marcus chuckled softly. "And nerves of steel." That was something to watch. Others followed, each with their own words of admiration. Some admitted to skepticism before the competition. Others simply congratulated her with quiet awe, their pride in the sport outweighing any bruised egos. For Emily, each handshake felt like another small barrier falling away, proof that respect, real respect, was earned by skill, not gender. When the pavilion finally cleared, Jack handed her a bottle of water and dropped into a chair beside her. "You realize what you've done, right?" he said, studying her with a mix of pride and amusement. "You didn't just break a record. You broke the rule book." Emily tilted her head. "The rule book?" "Unwritten rules," Jack said. "The ones that keep women off the podium, the ones that say precision shooting is a man's game. Today, you made all that look ridiculous." Emily looked down at her calloused hands. For years, those same hands had been mocked. Too small, too soft, too delicate to control a rifle at extreme distances. Now they were the hands that had carried a bullet across 3 miles of shifting air. "It wasn't about proving them wrong," she said quietly. "It was about proving the math right." Jack smiled. "Maybe, but proving them wrong doesn't hurt either." Outside, the sun dipped lower, washing the desert in molten gold. As evening shadows stretched across the range, a steady stream of visitors found their way to Emily's station. Some were fellow competitors. Others were families with children in tow. A young girl with freckles and a pink baseball cap approached shyly, clutching a small notebook. "Miss Carter?" the girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can you sign this?" Emily crouched to meet her eyes. "Of course." "What's your name?" "Leela," the girl said, her cheeks flushing. "I want to be a shooter someday, but people say girls can't be as good." Emily signed the notebook and handed it back with a steady smile. "Lila, the wind doesn't care if you're a girl or a boy. Neither does the target. If you practice, if you stay patient, you can do anything you set your mind to. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The girl's eyes widened, a spark of determination lighting her face. "Thank you," she whispered before running back to her parents, who mouthed a silent thank you of their own. Moments like that began to multiply. Teenagers asked for photos. Parents thanked Emily for showing their daughters that precision and courage weren't confined to any one gender. Even seasoned competitors admitted that her shot would inspire a new generation of shooters, young women and men alike, to challenge the limits of the sport. Meanwhile, Emily's phone buzzed relentlessly in her pocket. Messages poured in from friends, distant relatives, and strangers around the world. Videos of her shot spread like wildfire across social media. Hashtags bearing her name climbed to the top of trending lists. Brands that had once ignored her now scrambled to offer sponsorships. Yet Emily felt no urgency to answer any of it. The likes and headlines were fleeting. What mattered to her was the quiet transformation happening on the range itself. For years, she had walked into competitions and felt the weight of unspoken doubt pressing against her back. Now she felt the weight lifting, not just for herself, but for every woman who had ever been told to stay in the stands instead of stepping onto the firing line. Jack watched her carefully as she packed her rifle, sliding the sleek barrel into its padded case with the same precision she had used in training. "How does it feel?" he asked. Emily paused, tightening the latches. "It feels bigger than me," she admitted. "Like the shot belonged to more people than just the one who pulled the trigger." "That's because it did," Jack said. "Frank knew it. I knew it. And now the whole damn world knows it." They loaded the truck as twilight deepened, the desert cooling to a pleasant chill. The bleachers were nearly empty now, but the echoes of the day still lingered in the air, cheers, gasps, the unmistakable sound of history being made. Before leaving, Emily walked once more to the edge of the firing platform. The distant target was still faintly visible in the dying light, a glimmer of steel barely distinguishable from the horizon. She stared at it in silence, remembering the endless hours of practice, the failures, the moments when doubt whispered louder than resolve. Jack joined her, hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. "What's next for you?" he asked. Emily exhaled slowly, watching the breath rise into the cool night air. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Records don't last forever. Someone will beat this one eventually. But maybe that's the point." Jack raised an eyebrow. "The point?" "That someone will try," Emily said. "That a girl somewhere will see this and believe she can aim even farther. That's bigger than any record." Jack nodded, his expression softening. Frank would have liked that answer. As darkness settled over the range, Emily felt a profound calm wash over her. The shot had changed more than a record. It had shifted the conversation, cracked the invisible ceiling that separated belief from possibility. Driving away from the competition grounds later that night, Emily glanced out the window at the endless stretch of stars overhead. Each one seemed like a distant target, impossibly far, yet shining with quiet promise. She smiled to herself. Somewhere out there, someone was already dreaming of the next impossible shot. Long after the roar of the crowd had faded, and the headlines had begun to drift down the endless stream of news, Emily Carter's name continued to hang in the air like the echo of a distant shot. What she accomplished that desert afternoon was more than a record. It was a spark, and sparks have a way of leaping fences and igniting fires in places unseen. The morning after the competition, Emily woke in the small hotel room she and Jack shared, the world outside still draped in the pink haze of dawn. Her phone pulsed on the nightstand with hundreds of unread messages. Sponsors, journalists, and long-lost acquaintances filled her inbox. There were invitations to late-night talk shows, offers from outdoor brands, and proposals for documentaries. But it was the quiet messages that caught her attention first. Notes from young shooters, mothers of daughters, and even retired soldiers who had followed her journey from afar. One message, written in simple black text with no profile photo, read, "I watched your shot with my 11-year-old daughter. She asked me if girls could really shoot like that. I told her to keep watching. Thank you for giving her an answer." Emily read it twice, a lump forming in her throat. She set the phone aside and looked at her hand, steady, scarred, and more powerful than she had ever realized. Within weeks, the ripples spread. Shooting clubs across the United States reported a surge of new female members. Extreme distance ranges, once dominated almost entirely by men, began offering introductory programs for young girls. Several major networks aired slow-motion footage of Emily's historic bullet arc, replaying the moment the target light blinked red as if it were a moon landing. For Emily, the sudden attention was overwhelming. Interviews, photo shoots, and sponsorship negotiations filled her calendar. Yet she approached it all with the same patient discipline she had brought to the range. She insisted on staying authentic, no staged glamour shots without her rifle, no watered-down stories about luck or chance. When interviewers asked how it felt to be a female marksman, she corrected them with a calm smile. The term is marksman. Or shooter. My gender doesn't change the shot. Jack often teased her about her newfound celebrity. You realize you're America's favorite outlaw mathematician now, right? He said during a quiet dinner in their hometown a month after the event. Emily only laughed. If math and breathing steadily make me an outlaw, I'll take it. Despite the whirlwind, Emily made time to return to the places that shaped her. She visited the weathered range, where her grandfather had first taught her to align a sight and trust her instincts. The benches were cracked, and the paint on the target posts had long since peeled, but the smell of sun-warmed cedar brought a rush of memories. She stood there for a long time, imagining Frank beside her, the brim of his old cap tilted low over his eyes. You'd tell me to get back to practice, she murmured, smiling faintly. You'd tell me a record's only good until the next person takes the shot. That belief guided her next chapter. Instead of chasing endorsements or resting on a single victory, Emily launched the Steady Hands Initiative, a non-profit program aimed at mentoring young shooters, especially girls, who dreamed of competing at elite levels. She used her prize money to buy equipment for underfunded ranges, hosted free clinics in rural towns, and partnered with schools to introduce precision shooting as a sport grounded in discipline, physics, and mental focus rather than violence. The initiative quickly gained traction. Parents who had once hesitated to let their children handle rifles were reassured by Emily's emphasis on safety, science, and patience. Her clinics combined lectures on ballistics with lessons in breathing techniques and mindfulness. A steady hand comes from a steady mind, she told each class, echoing the words her grandfather once whispered to her. As months passed, Emily's influence reached beyond shooting. Leadership groups invited her to speak about perseverance. Universities asked her to guest lecture on the physics of long-range ballistics. Even corporate conferences sought her advice on focus and performance under pressure. She approached each invitation with humility, often opening her talks with the same refrain. I wasn't trying to break a record. I was trying to hit a target. Records are just what happens when preparation meets opportunity. Meanwhile, the sport itself evolved. Inspired by Emily's achievement, competitions began experimenting with even greater distances and new technology. Engineers worked on advanced optics and custom rounds capable of pushing the limits she had defined. Each announcement thrilled Emily. She wanted someone, man or woman, to eventually surpass her shot. Progress, she believed, was the true prize. Yet no matter how far the sport reached, Emily remained most proud of the quiet changes close to home. One evening, nearly a year after the record, she returned to the national range where it all began. A local youth competition was underway. From a distance, she watched a line of young shooters, boys and girls in equal numbers, adjust their sights and steady their breathing. Among them was a freckled girl in a pink baseball cap, a familiar spark of determination in her eyes. It was Lila, the child she had met on competition day. Emily stayed back, not wanting to distract her, but when the round ended, Lila spotted her and ran over, grinning from ear to ear. Miss Carter, she exclaimed. I hit the 1,000-meter target today. First time. Emily crouched to meet her, heart swelling. That's incredible, Lila. How did it feel? Like the wind listened, the girl said, beaming. And I remembered what you told me. The target doesn't care if you're a girl or a boy. Emily smiled. Exactly. The target only cares if you're ready. Watching Lila scamper back to her station, Emily felt a quiet satisfaction, deeper than any trophy. The record might one day fall, but the doors it opened would stay wide for generations. As twilight settled over the range, Emily set up her own rifle on a familiar bench. The air was calm, the sky streaked with lavender and silver. She loaded a single round, adjusted the scope, and exhaled. Her breath merged with the evening wind, slow and deliberate. The shot cracked across the fading light, the bullet slicing through the cooling air. She wasn't aiming for a record this time, only a quiet target at a modest distance. The steel plate rang with a satisfying ping, echoing across the empty field. Jack, standing behind her with his ever-present thermos of coffee, broke the silence. "Still steady," he said with a grin. Emily lowered the rifle and allowed herself a small smile. "Always steady," she replied. In that moment, beneath a sky filled with stars that stretched farther than any range could measure, Emily Carter understood her true legacy. It wasn't the 5,000-meter bullseye, or the interviews or the sponsorships. It was the steady heartbeat of possibility, proof that limits are only lines waiting for someone brave enough to aim beyond them. And somewhere out there, perhaps in a dusty backyard or a quiet rural range, another young shooter was already taking a deep breath, lining up a sight, and preparing to send their own impossible shot into the endless distance.